This is Aaron Azrod, and welcome to the 16th episode of the Truth Island podcast. I'm joined once again with Dave, and today we will be talking about just how susceptible we might all be to doing things that we would not ordinarily do. Through the experiments conducted by Stanley Milgram and Philip Zimbardo. To provide a little context, at the end of the Second World War, an international tribunal was established known as the Nuremberg Trials. The Nuremberg Trials were established to try former Nazi high officials, many of whom were accused of crimes against humanity. Although the trial mostly focused on some of the more senior members of the party and not the average rank-and-file soldier, one of the most common defenses that was used was, I was merely following orders. Of the 24 accused Nazis, 19 were found guilty, 3 were acquitted, 1 was not tried because of poor health, and 1 committed suicide. The question of whether someone could be exonerated from heinous crimes because they were simply following orders would remain a question that would linger in the minds of Americans for years to come. Just how susceptible we all are to committing atrocities, both at the highest and lowest levels. Books such as Philip K. Dick's novel Man in the High Castle and It Can't Happen Here by Sinclair Lewis explore the possibility of fascism and how it could take root in America, and that even people born free and proud could succumb to the tyranny of evil. Joining me now is Dave to elaborate more just how Stanley Milgram put to test the idea that people who commit heinous acts could simply be following orders.
Thank you very much, Aaron. This to me is a huge question, almost to me the question of evil. But two gentlemen, and I heard about in psychology classes 25 years ago when I was a little bit younger man, Stanley Milgram and Philip Zimbardo, trying to answer this question, as you said, why would good Germans allow the Holocaust to happen? It's people did not understand it. How could that be? Because a lot of people in America are of German ancestry. In fact, my parents had a good friend they called Dolph, who obviously first name was Adolf. Both these gentlemen were born in 1933, and looking back on Wikipedia, my favorite source, it's amazing. Philip Zimbardo and Stanley Milgram went to the same high school and the same class in the Bronx. Just one of these small world coincidences. And I thought they were completely separated, but let me tell you their stories. We start with Stanley Milgram, a man of Jewish ancestry. And at first I thought his family had escaped the Holocaust, but no, actually, they came over in the World War I era. So they were already here, and he was born in the Bronx. And it's interesting because I work with soldiers with PTSD, and we have a thing called survivor's guilt. And reading about him, he was so troubled that he was saying to people, I should have been born in, Berlin or Frankfurt or Hanover, Dresden, and I should have been the one going to Auschwitz. Survival's guilt is even more powerful than the womb sometimes, that your soldier next to you gets hit and might even have a leg amputated, and you haven't been scratched, you haven't been touched, but all of us hurt inside. Well, why was he taken? Why was he hurt? It should have been me. So Stanley Milgram was troubled by this, so he got into the field.
I want to ask you, Dave. It's like, what do you, in your experience, what makes some people have survivor's guilt and other people just say, yay, I'm alive and I can move forward? Do you think it's a special type of personality that feels that way, or a set of experiences?
No, I'm not sure if it's a personality, but I think it happens more than we know. I've read a psychologist that really was a little troubled that he didn't go to Vietnam, but he feels he stayed home and he got to help the people coming back. But no, it's just a part of the combat experience. But as I said, I think in this case it's because of this strong trauma, because this all happened while Stanley was growing up as a young man, as a young boy, hearing these stories. And I think he may have lost some of his relatives to the Holocaust. Mm-hmm.
I think maybe having the fact that he was Jewish and the fact that he had some kind of indirect connection to it probably hit home a little bit more because it didn't make
Oh,
the death as abstract as for some other Americans.
of course, of course. So anyway, begin the study of compliance, obedience. It's more thought of, and he was in Yale University back in New Haven, Connecticut. So they tried to design these experiments, and you just can't come out directly and say, "Well, we're doing an experiment about the Holocaust, and we need somebody to direct the people into the showers. Would you like to volunteer for that?" And people would say, "Wow, what are you talking about?" And so they had to be deceptive, and there were some of the people would be Confederates, it might be other grad students or students, but were in on the experiment. One of the first one was very harmless, but it started to indicate what was going on here. It was a classroom situation, and the subject would be the last one brought in the room and say, "Well, everybody's already here, but you arrived late, but just take that seat in the back of the classroom." And there'd be a pseudo instructor at the bulletin board or the board in the front. There'd be this bar graph, and there'd be 3 bars, and 3 would be a certain length, and the fourth one would be shorter. So the pseudo instructor said, "Well, we're going to ask questions about this bar graph today, and when we get to the bar that's the shortest, raise your hand." Okay, does everybody understand? Okay, yeah, yeah. So is it bar number 1? And everybody sits there. Is it bar number 2? No, they sit there. Is it bar number 3? Everybody raises their hand. And the subject, he raises his hand too. It's obviously wrong. But what is he thinking? Maybe I didn't understand the question. Maybe these other people know something I don't. And maybe I better just go along to get along.
I love
And
I love this idea of doubt filling one's mind because we can believe something to be 100% certain in the comforts of our solitude, like 2 + 2 is 4, and then once we're introduced to other people, we start doubting things that we absolutely hold to be true and to be valuable. And I think that doubt also is mixed with perhaps fear of reprisal, like, oh my God, if I don't go along with everyone else, they're going to think I'm dumb and they're not going to like me, and I might be ostracized.
if, for example, a German soldier is paid to obey orders.
You're
He's
right.
not supposed to ask, "Hey, Sarge, I don't know about this." And the other thing I would say, you get into a habit. Maybe the first time you're asked to do this, you may say, "I don't know," but you do it day after day after day, and it becomes routine, and no one else questions, so you don't question.
I like that. So conformity through routine. Going back to the first Milgram experiment with the bar, were there any people that did go against the group and stick to their guns and say, no, that bar is definitely the shorter one?
No, I apologize there, and I don't know the exact results, but the fact that anybody would, it's just amazing.
Yeah.
It's to me, it's like peer pressure. In middle school or junior high, we called it. Somebody gets a tattoo, well, then everybody's got to get a tattoo. It's just amazing social pressure.
It's sometimes like as a teacher, I've been in the classroom and a kid will raise their hand and they actually have the right answer, but it's one of those questions where the right answer sounds kind of wrong, and they'll raise their hand and say the right answer, and then the entire class will laugh at them, and then they'll actually like retract their hand and sort of like their shoulders, and I'll be like, no, actually, she was correct. That is the answer. And then the whole class will be like, oh, in like complete awe. But it's just amazing that when people laugh at us or like
Oh,
give any pushback, we suddenly retract whatever it is that we're thinking.
that maybe you shouldn't be the smarty pants anyway. You're showing up the rest of us. Yeah.
Thinking about all of these things when it comes to like routine, for example, like you were describing earlier, that because everyone else is doing it and everyone's doing it consistently, let me not be like the squeaky wheel. Like we kind of chastise people who are Squeaky, because squeaky to us is a sign of inefficiency. It's a sign that the car is about to break down. When in actuality, being squeaky means that you're drawing attention to, hey, this wheel's about to fall off the car. You better change it, right? But our reaction is like, no, that's squeaky, that's unpleasant. Let me ignore it. Just be like the other tires. But really, that tire is screaming out at you that it needs to be changed.
Yeah, that status quo is so powerful. Well, should we go on to the next experiment?
Yes, let's do it.
Because Stanley said, "Oh, this is all interesting, but we're talking about killing people here." So he set up this memory test, memory experiment, and the funny thing is, it's so 1950s technology, but it has this big bank of switches and this marked with voltages, 5, 10, 15, 20, whatever, up to 300 volts. And it's this long panel. And so there's a chair there, and there's another chair kind of around the corner. So the supposed thing is this is a memory test. And so we asked for volunteers. And this is another thing, we got this Confederate. But so there's the researcher is one of the guys in on the experiment, and he's got the lab coat on, looks very official, probably got his clipboard. He's the authority figure. So the volunteer comes in, and it's very important. The subject, he comes in first, because if the Confederate was in there first, you might kind of think, oh, maybe these two there's some collusion going on here. So anyway,
Right.
the subject comes in first, and then the Confederate just happens to say, I've got a heart condition. I hope this doesn't, affect me or whatever. Just kind of throw that out there. But so anyway, the researcher starts to explain this experiment that we're trying to test memory, and to reinforce it, we're going to be administering electric shocks. That just sounds kind of harmless. And so then we got a couple wires hanging out here, and here, hold on to these wires, and the other guy at Confederate, go over and push the 5-volt switch over there.
It's funny you say electric shocks. I can seldom think of a time where an electric shock was a positive thing.
Isn't that what your mommy did to you to teach you?
Right? It's like, yeah, nothing like when you come out of the womb, some electric shocks is exactly what a baby needs, right?
I think I'll go back in the womb for a while. But to reinforce that this is really happening, they both, the subject and the Confederate, feel that little 5 volts or whatever. Yeah, tingling. This is real. This is not a make believe thing. This is really happening. So anyway, so then the Confederate, or the subject of the experiment, he runs around the corner, and so then the victim, a volunteer, sits below at this console, and the researcher, let's get to work here. And so they starts, putting this, and I forgot the details exactly how the memory test worked, but that's unimportant. And the Confederate, he's got a script. And so he knows exactly when he's supposed to give the right answer and the wrong answer. And so they go a couple of right answers, then there's a wrong answer. And the researcher says, okay, administer the 10-volt reinforcement. And so they push the key, and the guy goes, oh. And so it's reinforcement, it actually happened. So they're working their way up, and more errors, and okay, 20 volts, 30 volts. And the subject, or the Confederate's going, ow, ow, you're getting louder. And we're getting up to 100 volts, and he's screaming. And at this point, the volunteers started asking, is everything okay? Is this? And the researcher, to me, it's the lab coat, but it's also the tone of voice. He's only ever says one thing: the experiment must continue.
Yes.
And also saying, I take complete responsibility. Everything's okay. And so we're going on. You administer the next shock. And
just to clarify, the person that's receiving the shocks is on the other side of a wall, so the person can't see that they are in fact not getting shocked in any way.
Yeah, right. It's so they can be heard, but they can't be seen. And I'm not sure about the details. I think maybe there was a buzzer when the volunteer would push the key, so then the Confederate knows when to make his response. That'd be or it'd be a little light or something like that, so the
Yeah.
Confederate knows when to make his response. Then above these switches, like between 100 and 200 volts, it says caution. And then between 200 and 300 volts, it says danger. So we're going, as I said, the Confederates making more and more racket. He's yelling, "Hey, get the heck out of here! I've got a heart condition." And the volunteers said, "No, should we continue?" And the research, the experiment must continue. And the amazing thing was, they would keep going. And then between like 250 and 300 volts, when they would push the key for the shock, it would be silence.
And that
What's
like
going on?
signifies the person has just passed away or is probably in need of medical attention right away.
It could very well be. And yeah, the volunteer may be saying, "Do we need to check on this guy or whatever?" And the experiment must continue. And the amazing thing was, when I heard this described back, I said 25 years ago, that 30% of the people would administer all the shocks and just
Wow.
comply, just obey orders. In Wikipedia said 65%, so I don't know which figure is correct. But this is another thing about the fact anyone would. It's just amazing.
So it's like we learned from Milgram that 7 in 10 people could very well execute an innocent person under just following orders. And I think that in the American consciousness actually allowed us to look at Nazis in quite a different lens in some way, because if we as Americans are willing to kill somebody, or at least 7 out of 10 people were willing to like push the lever all the way down to the final voltage, which definitely implied death. And I think the sound would even, like the person screaming would stop after like the third to last voltage, and that's just like you're killing them. You're basically shocking a dead person at that point. And it's just this like reminder that when we have figures of authority and we have built-in routines, like we're able to kind of engage in things that we never thought possible.
Yeah, it's just amazing. But today you look around, and we put children in cages. And just the last few days, they're talking about women being involuntarily sterilized. I think to prevent immigrants having anchor babies and then have a reason that they have to stay here. Some things, I don't hate my country, but I hate some things my country does. And we have to be alert to these things. But you're right, it's so easy just to say, well, I'm just obeying orders and I'm doing what I'm supposed to. And Colonel Klink ordered me to, so we're just going to go along.
So let's focus on, so there is some positivity, because what I like about the Milgram study, and I think also the one with the different lines, is that there's still 30% of people that can resist this. And I come of the belief system that if somebody else can do it, then we can all do it. And I think that's one of my guiding beliefs, is that if someone can run that marathon, then most of us could work our way to doing it. And I want to kind of brainstorm this with you a little, Dave. I'm wondering, what kind of personality types does it take to resist authority? Like I'm wondering, like what individuals do we have in our own life, in the media, that allow us to push back? And I think there's a lot of qualities, and I think one of those qualities is bravery. And I think that's something that we tend to see bravery as being like a reckless characteristic. We see bravery as being something that only a foolish youth kind of subscribes to. But I think as a society, we need to get a lot braver with standing up to authority and standing up to things that aren't exactly working anymore. Does that sound right to you, Dave?
Well, I look at it a little differently. Of course, I always do, Aaron. But I would say innocence. And to me, I go back to the story of the emperor with no clothes. And it's the little boy looking at the parade, pointing, and telling his daddy, "Daddy, why doesn't the emperor have any clothes on?" But because all of us are brainwashed that, oh, the emperor, he has the finest suit of clothes in the empire, and his flowing red robe is so beautiful with, tiger skins and all this other stuff and the crown. And but one person, the little boy, can see the truth. And to me, I forget who this quote's given by, but one person cannot change the world, but they're the only one that can.
Yes,
So sometimes, yeah, we have to stand up and say, no, this is wrong, and I'm going to take a stand, even though everybody else says yes.
I love that quote, and I wanna go back to the innocence thing. Yes, I 100% agree with you, Dave, that innocence and sticking to your guts is the thing, because I think children are perfect examples of resisting social conditioning. I think if you ever talk to a 4, 5, 6-year-old, they are anti-social conditioning in a really unique and really beautiful way. What I also think, though, is that if you have that innocence, like maybe there were people in the Milgram experiment who stuck to their guts and knew what they were doing was wrong, but they also had fear. I think that it's a combination of, because you could be very innocent and know what you're doing is wrong internally. Now, there were some people who thought the guy in the white lab coat was doing the right thing and just totally drank the Kool-Aid and bought into it. But there was probably other people who knew what they were doing were wrong, but they felt, oh my God, I might get arrested, or this guy's going to report me to the police, or some other negative consequence will befall on me. And that's kind of where I say you need to have bravery as well.
Yeah, you're right. To buck when you're going upstream, yeah, sometimes it's more difficult to buck the system for sure. So a few closing comments, because he was, finished and he's got his results or whatever. Then they started saying, well, these were all, these were all male students from Yale that volunteered or whatever, and so maybe men are more susceptible to doing this. So let's get some female students and see. And my
Sure.
gosh, the results were just about the same. And so, so these are college students. So these are spoiled rich kids. Well, let's take this experiment into town, and let's get some, some blue collar workers, some average Joes, and we'll run again. And again, similar results. So yeah, it was amazing. No matter what population. So they ran and reran this experiment several times, so to make sure it was valid.
It's funny you mentioned the woman thing, because I was actually discussing in a meetup with a woman who believed that because women have like lower levels of testosterone, and she said that women have like the protective instinct, like they have the maternal protective instinct to protect their children, they are not as capable of committing atrocities or genocides and all this, because she said as a mother you have that maternal instinct to preserve life and to preserve your children, and therefore committing atrocities or committing genocide is just outside the scope of any woman. And I think that this Milgram study actually completely refutes that.
Yeah, it's amazing. To move on a little bit, he published his results in 1963. And the amazing thing is, of course, I have a weird memory, but I swear I can remember where I was when I heard the news broadcast on the radio. And I was in my college campus. So I swear I started college in 65, but maybe I was there with my dad for a basketball game or something. But of course, it's like the media most of the time. It got partially right, partially wrong, or whatever. But you can imagine the news broadcast from the Yale campus, students are simulating electrocutions or
Wow.
things like that. And you can imagine, I mean, because these folks back east, but so when Stanley Milgram's biography was written, the title was "The Man Who Shocked the World,"
I love that.
because yeah, because it's so descriptive, of course, on both ways, that the shock experiments, but the results were so shocking that people could not believe it. So, of course, then people would ask, well, was this even ethical? Should he have done it? Should they have had releases? Should they have told people more about the experiments? And of course, I've even heard people lately say, well, it wasn't replicated. And I saw some pictures that They tried to do it again, but the thing is, they had the same 50s technology, this big old bank of
Yeah,
switches, and
yeah.
it was so weird. People say, "Well, what in the heck's going on here?" Milgram was so powerful that he brought this to light that this can happen. That I'm just a link in the chain.
And the thing about replicating things like this is like once a study like that goes published, well, the cat is kind of out of the bag because there might be some people that don't know that that has happened, but then people are going to walk into this experiment and like if you try and do it 20 years later, like, wait a minute, I read about an experiment like this in the paper 20 years ago. Like I think I know what you're doing. So there's probably other ways that we could do it. There's probably a new spin or a new angle we could do on it, but I think he did it enough times. I think that we have this idea in science that, oh, well, you have to replicate it. But I think that because he actually did the hard work of doing Yale students and then doing the working class and then doing all sorts of different demographics, I think he did do the hard work of proving that this holds up in a variety of different populations.
And to close this up, I would say the most interesting thing is it made it to Hollywood. Of course, this was 1984. The movie Ghostbusters. That you millennials may not even heard it
Oh, I
or
know
ever
Bill Murray.
saw it.
I'm a huge fan.
But one of the opening scenes was the Bill Murray character was a researcher in a memory experiment, and I think they had flashcards or something, so it's a little differently. But he was administering shocks, and it was just a small part of the movie. And to me, it was kind of an inside joke that people that knew about the experiment would recognize what was going on, but it wasn't a big part of the plot. But yeah, it just shows how big an impact this experiment had on society.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that and there's been a lot of documentaries and a lot of films like highlighting the contribution that he made. And I think, as a result of the Milgram study, and I think the next study we're going to talk about as well, there is like an ethical board now that like if you're a psychologist and you want to do something like this, it has to go through an ethical board that evaluates, okay, is this going to reveal people's privacy, or is this going to damage people in the long term? And that's important. Like we don't want to create data and we don't want to create experiments that leave people that are already vulnerable more vulnerable. But at the same time, I think that when we have all of these barriers, it prevents us from kind of discovering some ugly truths about humanity that might benefit us.
Yeah, and as I was saying before, I mean, you almost have to do it with deception, because if you do it straightforward, it really would skew the results. So for ready to move on,
Yeah,
there's
let's do it.
another. These are the two most, to me, the most critical psychology experiments of the 20th century. And the second was a man named Philip Zimbardo, and as I was saying, it was really a amazing thing. He was also born in 1933 and went to the same high school. It's not clear if they knew each other, but his situation was a little different. Where Stanley Milgram was Jewish, this guy was from Italy, but kind of the South European appearance, kind of a little darker skin, dark hair, and he said he was often mistaken for being Jewish or maybe being Hispanic. He started thinking about, well, people can't even put me in a category, but these categories are such a big deal. It started him down the track to study sociology. How does society fit together, and how come we're in these tribes, and we resent each other, and this, that, and the other. So he ended up out in Stanford, and his experiments were about 10 years later. That's why I didn't think they were related at all, but they were. He got a grant from the U.S. Navy to study the interactions in their prisons. And of course, I was in the Navy for a while, and you're out at sea, and something goes wrong. You have a prison on board ship, which might just be one of the compartments, or whatever. So they have unusual situations, but a lot of abuse between the guards and the prisoners. And so the government said, well, study why this goes on. Philip Zimbardo designed this experiment, and we're going to get 24 students together, and 12 prisoners and 12 guards. and they pretty much selected randomly. They didn't look at personalities or anything else. But and I think they're down in the basement of the psychology building, and I think it was some old instructors' offices or whatever were converted into jail cells. No bars, but just doors. And the funny thing is, they actually had some sheriff officers go out and arrest the prisoners at their houses and bring them in to make this as realistic as possible. And to me, I thought it was a big deal about studying the effect on the prisoners. So then we've got to have guards. So we have 3 shifts of 8. And so they got some khaki uniforms from government surplus. And then the touch of these mirrored sunglasses that, so you can't see your eyes. And there were also a wooden baton to reinforce the authority figure. Specific instructions, you can't hit the prisoners. And it was going to be for 2 weeks. And so we're starting off, and everybody goes down in their positions. And the first day goes pretty well. And of course, the guards, they want to exercise their authority. And really not much they can do, but they can have inspections and, okay, you guys line up and we'll call names. And and the other thing is we're going to address them only by numbers to depersonalize them as much as possible. And then we realized, we can start taking things away. So pretty soon, we take away the prisoner's clothes, we take away the bedclothes, we take away the mattresses. Pretty soon, we take away the cots. So after a couple of days, this has just gone amazing. And so you end up with 5 or 10, 10 naked guys. Well, what do you got to do? Well, you got to make a pyramid of naked guys. And so and of course, all this was being videotaped. And Philip Zimbardo had a girlfriend. So I say this is the tale of 2 girlfriends. So he called his girlfriend, well, come o'clock, this is Wednesday night, come over here about 10 o'clock and see what's going on here. He knew she'd be amazed. So she was looking what's going on, these videos, these, pyramids of naked guys and everything else, these guys trooping around naked. And so she starts yelling, what in the hell are you doing? These kids. And Zimbardo said, well, hey, no, this is an experiment. It's all defined and it's under control. I'm taking care of everything. He says, you're crazy. And she storms out and says, is this the man you are? I'm breaking up with you. I have nothing to do with you. So
and he's like, no, sweetheart, I'm trying to benefit humanity here.
Yeah, well, no more Saturday night. So he follows her out to the parking lot and he tries to reason with her. And, like I said, this is science and I'm a scientist and, you're a scientist too. You ought to understand this. So he goes back inside and said, maybe I better end the experiment. So the next day, Thursday, they broke it down. So the 2-week experiment lasted 4 days.
Wow.
But so it wasn't the prisoners, it was the guards. The guards just went off the rail. And like I said, no one was physically hurt. But, the other thing I didn't mention, I think it was the second day, one of the prisoners, he just lost it. He said, get me out of here. And I'm going crazy. So they sent him home. But there was a hunger strike. And one of the prisoners tried to organize the prisoners into define and starting the revolution. There was a janitor's closet that was used for solitary confinement.
Jeez.
So there was supposed to be a limit that you could put somebody in there for not more for 2 hours. But I think it was 4 hours or overnight. They just broke all the rules and just treated the prisoners like poop. So so anyway.
Just to clarify, so the guards are just college students. They don't have any formal auxiliary kind of training in dealing with a situation like this. They kind of had like a quick crash course on okay, we're going to put these uniforms on you and you're now going to become a guard. And I think even just putting that uniform on somebody changes them in some way.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, that's, from the word uniform. Yeah. We start uniformly and you enter a role. And I think that's part of the explanation that if you're in this role, then you have permission to act this way and you're expected to act this way. So, and that was a big part of the experiment in the deductions, the
And I
results.
think I think it's interesting because when we think of like the rise of Nazism, for example, we think of it as being this like long drawn out 10-year indoctrination process. Like we think that, oh, you can only become evil if, we have a fascist dictator for 10 years and you are watching hours and hours and hours of propaganda. But I think Zimbardo is basically proving, no, I can just put a random uniform on some guy and within 2 days he'll be committing atrocities, that's even more startling because it shows how quick that transformation could happen.
Yeah, yeah. And as we were saying in Milgram, to almost anybody. Yeah. And of course, there was one guard that was more abusive than the others,
Sure.
and most of this bad stuff took place, during the night shift. First it started by, we'll have these inspections at 2 in the morning, to prevent the people from sleeping and have a good night's rest. But yeah, it was just amazing how it broke down.
I think also the sunglasses, like not being able to look into somebody's eyes, probably, they say that the eyes are like the window to the soul. So
Yes.
I think when you close off someone's eyes, you stop seeing their humanity. And I know that the prisoners didn't have sunglasses on, but I think that them not being able to like fully look at one another, I think that also kind of adds to this effect of dehumanization, that we can't look eye to eye with one person, because when someone's lying to you, for example, if it's really hard for people to lie to you and make consistent eye contact. You have to be straight up sociopath to be able to pull that one off. Most people, when you're just constantly looking them in the eyes, their mouth starts giving, they start smiling, they start giggling. They can't hold it down. It's hard.
Yeah, that look with the mirrored sunglasses, I would call it menacing.
Sure.
And you often see it in movies that yeah, the character like that is just superior and you're inferior, and I have complete control of you.
Now, I'm wondering with the Zimbardo study, like he obviously had to shut down the circus after 4 days. I'm wondering if he probably gave them permission to actually hit prisoners. I'm 90% confident that some of those guards would have started hitting the prisoners and taken it to the next level if they were given permission. Or maybe if the experiment had been allowed to go the full 2 weeks, they probably would have just naturally gone to that level on their own.
Yeah, I read an excellent book about Guantanamo Bay. Yeah, I mean, you start giving commands about, okay, hold your arms out straight for an hour.
Sure.
Well, you find out pretty quick, like 5 or 10 minutes, it's impossible. And so, your arms drop, and so the guard hits you. And it's just an excuse to hit people. But you're right, it's very tempting to abuse your authority, and because so many times the prisoner is the other. It's in the other person in society, or the in war, the people that are less than human we're fighting, and you're mad enough for being over there when you don't want to be over there, so you take it out on the prisoner. So it's very sad.
I think that's very true. There's this idea, like, and I want to touch upon what you're saying about the soldier not wanting to be there, because sometimes the most, like, we can have a lot of petty tyrants in our society. Like, you give somebody just a little lick of power, and especially if it's a person that's not used to having power or has never had power before, you give them a lick of power and they sort of run wild. You think of that person that works at the DMV who, like, they don't have
Yeah.
all that much power, but in that moment they can be like, no, to the back of the line, you didn't bring form I-9321. And they kind of get like a little thrill out of that. Or let's say that's a security guard with a college campus, for example. They've seen that person, that student, entering the campus like 1,000 times, but this is the one day they forgot their ID. But this is the day that they want to flex their authority muscle and be like, no, I'm sorry, I can't let you in. And I think that authoritarianism preys on those types of people, the people that have no power, and then giving them a uniform and just a little sparkle of power, and then they start running wild with it.
Yeah, that just makes their day, because in the rest of the world, they probably wouldn't be in charge of you, but in their little cubicle, it's their world, and they're going to exercise their power. By gosh,
And I,
exactly.
I want to speak about the one dude, the one guy, the one guard who went too far, right? Because you said that some guards were pretty nasty, but then there was one guy who was exceptionally nasty. I think that also comes from a place of personal abuse. Like maybe that guard that went way too far, maybe he was really abused in some previous instance in his life. And now he has this, security guard authority, and now's his time to sparkle. This is his time to shine. So I think that people that are abused from the beginning you're actually training them. Like people who have a history of being abused actually make the perfect candidates for these kinds of roles.
Yeah, that's the thing is we think we have an ideal society, but we've really got a place where people have different parenting styles. And my dad whipped me when I was a little boy, so by gosh, I'm going to spank my kid if they act up. And others say, "Oh no, you don't touch your child." But yeah, there's some people that, in fact, that's one of Jordan Peterson's stories about this man who was a serial killer. He said, read his book about how he was brought up and you'll understand. But
Yeah,
yeah, it's a sad commentary.
thinking about the child that gets hit, I think it's extremely difficult to be a child that gets hit and then grow up to be the parent that does not hit, because that requires
Yeah.
a fundamental shift. Because I meet so many people in my life, Dave, and I hear this: when I was younger I had to do blah blah blah. And I hear this a lot, of like, well, when I was your age or when I was in your shoes I didn't have anybody. And I'm like, well, with all due respect, don't you want to see the world get a little bit better? Don't you want to see some of these things
Yeah.
improve? And I just don't get it. It's almost as if, like, because I had to suffer this injustice when I was younger, I want all future younger people to suffer this injustice.
Yeah, and to criticize your parents is almost to say they were wrong and you're a bad person. So yeah, people, it's awful hard for people to admit that it needs to be changed. But yeah, we do have to improve this world a little bit at a time. But to finish the story,
Yeah,
um, this was such a radical thing and such a terrible thing had happened. Philip Zimbardo, it's naturally, okay, this is the thing you write a book about. And but it was so close to him. I mean, it was his thing. So he was not able to write a book about it. Although, everything was recorded, everything's right there. So, so this was 74 or so. 30 years later, we have Abu Ghraib in Iraq and abuse of prisoners. And the second girlfriend, because Muslims are taught that, if, you're never going to be a naked man and sit, unless in front of your wife or your mother.
sure.
But so this army sergeant said, "Well, hey, let me call my girlfriend, and we'll have her bring over here, and we'll get all these prisoners naked, and she'll walk up and down and oogle them and make comments about this, that, and the other, just to make them feel terrible, embarrass them." So so some pictures were taken, and they made it back to the states, and of course then they're picked up by the media, and so there's these pictures of pyramids of naked bodies, these naked prisoners. And so there was somebody in a TV studio somewhere that taken psychology 101. He said, "Oh my gosh, this is Stanford prison experiment." Because you can take the pictures and they're just interchangeable. So they called Zimbardo, and I swear the pictures came up in the morning, and Zimbardo was interviewed that afternoon because
Wow.
it was just so logical.
Yeah.
And I forget his comments, but it was just amazing that they knew right away who to talk to.
I remember Abu Ghraib pretty vividly, and I remember that one picture of this naked prisoner who's wearing that black sheet over their head, and there's a dog
Mm-hmm.
right next to them. And the thing that also stands out to me is there's this one photo of a very young girl. Like, she's probably, I forgot her name, but she was, maybe 19, 20 years old. And she's standing there smiling next to these prisoners that are forming like a male pyramid. And I think that, like, these people are the soldiers and the guards that were put in charge of Abu Ghraib, they're so young. and they fit that mold of being young, never had any form of power or responsibility in their life prior to this, and they make like the perfect candidates to do these kind of things because they've never been entrusted with this before, and this is kind of their moment to like be powerful.
Yeah, they were only trained as military police. They weren't trained to be jailers or prison guards. And so after this happened, Zimbardo was asked to come on the defense team of one of these army sergeants. And so he was entirely sympathetic. And of course, the other thing is there was a bombardment going on from time to time, so they never know when a mortar shell would come in. And
Yeah.
these sergeants, they had to sleep in the prison cells, so it was a very strange situation. But so he finally wrote his book called The Lucifer Effect. Lucifer the devil.
Yeah.
But so the first half is the complete reenactment of the Stanford prison experiment, and the second half is about the terrible things going on in Iraq. And so it's quite the book. It's quite the story. It's just amazing.
Yeah, I got to check out that book, the Lucifer Effect. The one thing that we need to take out of Milgram and Zimbardo is that we think of Lucifer or we think of Satan or just evil, like even for the atheists or people who are not coming from a religious background, we think of evil as something that's external to us. Like, oh, there's
Yeah.
the evil guy. There's the evil guy poisoning our minds. But what we fail to realize is that this evil exists within all of us, no matter how saintly or how wonderful we are, it's there, and it just takes the right dial and it just takes the right push for us to for that to come out of each and every one of us. And that's very scary, but at the same time it's immensely liberating. It's liberating to know, well, if evil comes from within us, we have power over it, right? Like, I think that's actually kind of liberating, because if evil is just an external force that we can't control, well, that's kind of depressing. But if it comes from within us, it's therefore something that we can change.
Yeah, and I think it ties into what Carl Jung called the shadow. But you're right, the good and evil is inside of us. And so it's our personal decisions. People talk about the angels on one shoulder and the devil's on the other shoulder. But yeah, that's one of our big revelations, that it's internal to us, and it's decisions we make on our own. And of course, I have to go back to Hollywood again. It wasn't actually Hollywood this time, but it was actually a German, which is a little ironic, but a German film on the Stanford prison experiment came out, I think maybe in the 1980s. So it also hit Hollywood. But like I said, these two experiments, Zimbardo and Milgram, are just so powerful. I'm glad I had a chance to talk to you about them today, Aaron.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being on the show again, Dave.
My pleasure. To me, these are important lessons, and I hope the people listening to these get a lot out of them.
Well, thank you, Dave. This concludes the 16th episode of the Truth Island podcast. I'm Aaron Azrod.